100 rokov s vami v dobrom aj v zlom. Pravda.
Pleasant day. Welcome to our roundtable discussion, which is going to be analyzing a demanding but all the more important topic, violence against women or abuse against women, if you like, how private sector and state sector can join forces and how to deal with the issue in the times of pandemics and how all the stakeholders can join forces to combat violence against women. Before I introduce the guests, I'd like to thank the partners of our event. Besides AmCham, it's IKEA and Business Leaders Forum. As usual, you can also join us through Slido using hashtag violence against women, and you can put questions to all our guests. For the start, I have two speeches. First, we have Jarka Lajčáková from the Office of the President of the Slovak Republic, and then we will listen to Ms. El Hilali from IKEA. Thank you very much. Greetings to all of you. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to the discussion. And first of all, I'd like to thank for addressing the topic which President regards as one of the top priorities. President tries to be the voice of the people who can't be heard, and certainly women and children exposed to domestic abuse are one type of these groups. And the president is trying hard to make sure that these women and children do not stay alone and get the necessary assistance. However, in our office, we also do realize that despite the strong efforts of the non-governmental sector and the number of officials in the state administration, the system of assistance to women and children subject to domestic abuse has a lot of weak points. And it's going to be almost 1 year since we initiated the intersectorial cooperation between the ministries and the NGOs and private stakeholders to strengthen a very important legal institute we have, the so-called intervention centers that help women get out of the influence of the aggressors. This is based on good practice from Slovakia and abroad, and it's been also introduced in the legislation on the Act on the Victims of Criminal Offences, and it's at the end of the legislation process in the Parliament. We hope that this bill is going to be passed very soon, and the existence of these centers and their stable financing is going to represent a very important milestone in the whole mosaic of steps that need to be performed in this specific area. Needs to be taken in this specific area. But we do know that much more needs to be done, not only with regards to the assistance to victims of domestic abuse, but also safe shelters and the stability of these shelters. Much more attention needs to be paid to prevention. We very much appreciate the attention by the private sector and the initiative of IKEA, which is exactly looking into prevention of domestic abuse and increasing awareness of domestic abuse or violence against women. We very much appreciate the ambition of today's event to look for synergies between the activities of the private sector and the state sector or the public sector and the NGOs. And we will very much like to follow up on the cooperation on these efforts, because only by joining forces we can efficiently provide help. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for the possibility of opening this event. I do appreciate that. I wish you an insightful discussion. I would like to join it. And now, Ms. El Hilali from IKEA.
So good morning, everybody. I would like to, first of all, express my greetings to you this morning. And also seeing how many of you this morning are present, I would like to give a big thank you. It's really impressive to see how many people this morning representing companies are together with us this morning, and I feel very pleased about that. Talking about a topic that is extremely important. And also knowing that we also are in a period where we all are very disrupted in the business. We are disrupted in our personal lives. But nevertheless, it's also very important to continue to open up the eyes and see where also other people are struggling even more. So thanks for
Chceli by sme
being
predstaviť
all
niekoľko
together this
iniciatív, ktoré
morning.
máme v
It's really
spoločnosti IKEA.
a great
Sme známi
opportunity.
ako značka, ktorá sa snaží
Then
vytvoriť
if
bezpečnejšie
you would be so
prostredie
kind to click the next slide, I will
domovoch.
present a couple of initiatives and
Chceli by sme
approach
sa
that we have
ubezpečiť, že
at
domov
IKEA.
je
And
miesto, kde sa ľuďom
we are
môžu
very
cítiť
known as a
bezpečne.
brand for
Žiaľ,
creating a
nie je
better
to,
life at
neplatí
home
to
for many
pre
people. At
všetkých.
least we try every day. And
By
for
ste
us,
mohli
looking also at
kliknúť ďalší slajd.
home
Tlmočnícka
being a
kabina sa
safe
ospravedlňuje,
place
kvalita zvukového
should also
prenosu je
be
veľmi
something
nízka. Budeme sa snažiť
normal
urobiť, čo sa dá.
for the many people out there.
Dnes
Unfortunately,
budeme
it's not the
hovoriť
case for
do veľkej miery
everyone.
o problematike
And
domáceho
so
násilia.
you could,
A
if you
možno si
can
všetci
click,
kladete
please.
otázku,
Yes, and so
prečo
this
je to
morning
vlastne
is really
téma
much
pre
about
súkromný
talking
sektor.
about the issue of domestic abuse.
Odpoveď je
And
celkom
you
jednoznačná.
could all ask
Všetci sme súčasťou
the
spoločnosti,
question,
všetci sme
why
občania,
is it a
všetci
topic
sme
for private sector?
zamestnanci.
And
A
the
mnohí
answer
z
for
nás
me is
majú
also very obvious.
skúsenosti s
Like, we are
domácim
all part
násilím,
of
či už
society,
sprostredkované,
we are
alebo
all
z prvej ruky.
citizens,
A
we have
je to
employees
jednoznačne
also
problém,
that are
ktorý sa týka všetkých z nás, bez ohľadu na to, či máme priame
domestic abuse.
skúsenosti alebo nie. A
We
preto
our
je pre nás dôležité ako pre
customer, so I
spoločnosť,
think
ako by
it's
sme mohli mať
really
pozitívny vplyv na
an
ľudí
issue that is
prostredníctvom
concerning all
toho,
of us.
že okrem
And
toho,
so
že
for
robíme
us,
biznis,
even more,
je pre nás veľmi
working
dôležité, aby sme
on
dokázali
how
nejakým
can we,
spôsobom
impact
ovplyvniť
the people in
pozitívnym
the
spôsobom
positive
tento
way,
problém, obzrieť sa okolo a
through
pouvažovať nad tým,
making,
ako by sme
of course,
mohli
being in the business
pozitívnym
and making
spôsobom
good business.
ovplyvniť
It's also
tento
important
problém.
that we do it in a way that we look around us and see how can we
Počujeme sa
also
teraz?
support vulnerable groups.
Dobre.
So, as I said, we can also
Ako
ask
som povedala,
ourselves, is that
môžeme si tiež
a
klásť
topic for
otázku,
private sector?
je to vôbec
If you go
problém
to the
pre
next
súkromný
slide,
sektor? Je to vôbec otázka,
my
ktorú by sme
answer is
mali
definitely
riešiť?
yes.
A moja odpoveď je
If you
rozhodne
see
áno. Je to
today,
vec, ktorej by sa mal venovať aj súkromný sektor.
The KPIs or
Keď sa
the
pozrieme
data we
na
have
KPIčka, teda
in
tie
the
kľúčové
market in
indikátory výkonu a
what we
údaje,
can see is
ktoré tu máme za
that,
Slovensko
in Slovakia,
ohľadom
in the
rovnosti
study,
pohlaví, tak vidíme, že
from the
štúdii, ktorú uskutočnil inštitút EIGE,
unfortunately, Slovakia
žiaľ,
sits in the
Slovensko
bottom
je
of
úplne na chvoste tabulky,
the many
čo sa
European
týka rovnosti
which also mean that there is
pohlaví,
still
respektíve
a
rodovej
lot of
rovnosti.
work
To znamená, že
to do in
na
that
Slovensku
field.
ešte v tejto oblasti
Then
musíme
we
urobiť
also
veľa
can see
práce.
that,
Zároveň vidíme,
women
že
starting 15 plus,
že
and I think
vek,
that
že
just
až
putting this 15 plus also mean
43%
that
žien vo
it's in
veku
the age
15 a
between
viac
kids and
rokov,
and-
to znamená
and-
ešte
and
sú tam
women,
aj zahrnuté tínedžerky,
33%
tak
have
až 43% z
experienced
nich
physical violence.
malo
I think it's
skúsenosti s
really
fyzickým násilím.
dramatic
Myslím si, že to je
to see
dramatické
such
číslo,
big amount of
že
still people victim of domestic abuse.
takýto obrovský podiel
And of
populácie
course,
je obeťou
when we
domáceho
talk
násilia,
about,
respektíve má skúsenosti s
women,
domácim
we also
násilím,
know
priame
that a lot of
skúsenosti.
kids also
A
are affected
vieme, že toto
with the
nie je
situation.
problém len žien
We have
samotných, ale
also,
že aj takýto problém má obrovský dopad aj na samotné deti, ktoré žijú v domácnosti.
We are part of the society, our
My
employees
ako
are part
IKEA
of the
sa
society.
snažíme vnímať samých
And,
seba ako súčasť spoločnosti. Všetci
it's
zamestnávateľia a
quite
zamestnanci sú
impressive to see
súčasťou
that
spoločnosti a
more
je
than 70%
naozaj
of
veľmi
our coworker
významný
has
údaj, že viac ako
experienced
70%
either directly or
ľudí má
indirectly,
priame alebo
domestic
nepriame
abuse.
skúsenosti
And I
s
think we
domácim
can all,
násilím.
unfortunately,
A
refer from close or far to an
Žiaľ,
experience
každý z
around
nás môže či už zblízka
This
alebo
is,
zďaleka hovoriť
to
o
me
nejakej skúsenosti s
and
domácim
to all of
násilím.
us,
Alebo teda viac ako 70% z
unacceptable.
nás. A to je podľa mňa
We can
neakceptovateľné. Je to nepriateľné.
Close our
Nemôžeme
eyes looking
zatvárať
at that.
oči pred týmto problémom.
And for sure, I think that this is
Dozajista
something
si
that
myslím, že je to
to me
niečo,
also
čo
remain that it's a violence of human rights.
je to
And I think
porušovanie,
this is
násilné porušovanie
definitely
ľudských
something
práv.
that we
A
need to
to
take care
je
of,
rozhodne niečo,
together.
čomu sa musíme postaviť
Then,
a proti čomu musíme
when it
bojovať
comes
všetci
to
spolu.
IKEA,
Čo sa
I
týka
think,
teraz
you
IKEA
would
ako
ask, why
takej,
to focus
no
on
možno sa
that
pýtať,
as
že
well.
prečo
But,
by
you
sa
know, for
IKEA
us,
práve mala zameriavať na
this is
tento
not
problém. Nuž,
something very
pre
new.
nás to nie je niečo, čo
In
by
the
bolo
way we
zásadným
work and
spôsobom
operate,
nové.
and I'm sure that
Spôsobom,
it can
akým
resonate
pracujeme
for
a
most of you
akým
also
funguje naša
sitting in this
prevádzka, a
virtual
možno
room today,
aj väčšina z vás,
that
ktorá sedí v tejto virtuálnej miestnosti, si uvedomuje, že pracovať s rodovou rovnosťou je veľmi dôležité, je to pozitívne pre ľudí a je to dobré, ale aj pre biznis samotný. A v našej stratégii pre diverzitu a inklúziu IKEA je jednou z mnohých spoločností, ktorá funguje týmto spôsobom. Snažíme sa zabezpečiť, aby v rôznych pozíciách a pracovných rolách v rámci naprieč celou našou hierarchiou bol podľa možnosti rovnaký alebo rovnoprávne zastúpenie žien aj mužov. A keď hovoríme o rodovej rovnosti, tak hovoríme samozrejme aj o rozdieloch vo výplatách medzi mužmi a ženami, takže snažíme sa zaistiť, aby neexistovala žiadny zásadný rozdiel medzi výplatami, ktoré vyplácame mužom a ženám, ktorí samozrejme robia na rovnakej úrovni alebo v rovnakom pracovnom zaradení. A myslím si, že sa nám v tomto darí a spoločnosť IKEA ako taká je v podstate, môže hovoriť o nulovom rozdiele medzi mzdami vyplácaným mužom a ženám na rovnakých pozíciách. A potom je to nakoniec aj o veľmi ďalším veľmi významným problémom, ktorý riešime, je rovnoprávnosť príležitosti, rovnosť príležitosti, aby napríklad mama od rodiny, alebo teda matka s deťmi mala rovnaké príležitosti, kariérne príležitosti, ako napríklad iní naši zamestnanci. Takže keď sa pozrieme na všetky tieto čísla, ktoré som vám odprezentovala, rozhodli sme sa, že nebudeme ticho. Myslím si, my ako firma sa domnievame, ako spoločnosť veríme, že musíme, alebo sme zodpovední za to, aby sme pozdvihli hlas, aby sme hovorili na hlas o týchto veciach, aby sme pomohli všetkým obetiam domáceho násilia, za ktorých môžeme ako keby pozdvihnúť náš hlas a bojovať za ich bezpečnosť a bezpečnosť ich detí.
Click on the next slide, and with that, I would like to share with you a clip that we have initiated in Slovakia, but not only. I will come back to
uviedli sme toto video nielen na Slovensku, ale v mnohých ďalších krajinách. Snažíme sa aj pomocou tohto videa hovoriť nahlas o probléme domáceho násilia a urobiť ho transparentným, aby zabránili tomu, že budeme zatvárať oči, pretože tento problém je tu medzi nami a nemôžeme pred ním zatvárať oči. Pustíme si teraz video a potom budeme komentovať.
Násilie, ktoré ženy doma zažívajú, je skutočné, aj keď ho nie je vždy vidieť. Niektorú z foriem psychického násilia zažilo doma 47% žien na Slovensku. Každý domov by ale mal byť bezpečným miestom. IKEA.
Tak a s tým by som sa s vami chcela podeliť o informácie, ktoré dokazujú, domnievam sa to, že toto nie je pre nás reklamná kampaň, ale je to pre nás iniciatíva. Nie je to reklamná kampaň, aby sme predali viac nábytku, ale je to pre nás iniciatíva, na ktorej nám záleží a neskončíme s touto iniciatívou, až pokým sa nám nepodarí dosiahnuť to, čo chceme dosiahnuť. Máme tu veľmi jasný záväzok, záväzok voči tejto iniciatíve, voči jej cieľom, takže dovolte mi predstaviť oblasti, ktorých by sme chceli dosiahnuť konkrétne ciele, v ktorých chceme vidieť konkrétny pokrok. A spolu s našim tímom sme pevne rozhodnutí, že dosiahneme udržateľné výsledky a nastavíme systém, ktorý môže pomáhať obetiam domáceho násilia. A s tým, ako ste videli, ten klip je namierený na zvyšovanie povedomia, aby bola táto téma v spoločnosti viditeľná a nezatvárali sme pred ňou oči. Zároveň by som chcela povedať, že ide to ďalej ako je len Slovensko. To je oveľa ďalej ako je len Slovensko, Česká republika, Maďarsko. To sú krajiny, za ktoré som ja zodpovedná so svojím tímom. Táto kampaň sa nasadzuje vlastne po mnohých ďalších krajinách sveta. A domnievame sa, že tento problém naozaj je problémom, ktorým čelíme v mnohých krajinách, možno zľahka iným spôsobom, ale tým, že pozdvihneme náš hlas, vytvoríme alebo budeme posilňovať hlas hnutia, ktoré už možno existuje, ale takto jedine môžeme dosiahnuť výsledky. Takže zvyšovanie povedomia. Druhá oblasť je budovanie kapacít. Môžeme povedať, že sme investovali istý finančný objem, istú sumu, prostredníctvom ktorej môžeme podporiť útulky pre ženy, ktoré sú obeťou násilia, domáceho násilia. Samozrejme, pracujeme s rôznymi partnermi v jednotlivých krajinách, teda iní partneri na Slovensku, iní v Čechách, iní v Maďarsku, ale jeden z našich partnerov je organizácia Fenestra, s ktorou veľmi radi spolupracujeme, veľmi sme hrdí, že môžeme v ruku v ruke spolupracovať na riešení tohto problému a bojovať pomocou nášho času a našich zdrojov voči násiliu na ženách. A na to som veľmi hrdá, že môžeme byť bok po boku s takou organizáciou, ako je Fenestra, a spájať sily. Potom ďalšou oblasťou sú údaje alebo dáta, pretože ak nám chýbajú údaje o nejakom probléme, tak ťažko môžeme ten problém vôbec riešiť, alebo nevieme, na čom sme, nevieme, čo sa naozaj deje. Takže preto musíme sa ubezpečiť, že máme presné dáta a tieto údaje nás podporujú a na základe týchto dát môžeme podnikať rôzne kroky a komunikovať s policy makerami alebo s tvorcami politík a tak sa jedine môžeme ubezpečiť, že pomáhame riešiť tento problém, aby sme vedeli presne, ktoré segmenty toho problému musíme riešiť. Ďalšou oblasťou, na ktorú sa sústredíme, je presadzovanie zmien a propagácia zmien. A tu spolupracujeme s rôznymi aktérmi, aby sme vytvorili trvalo udržateľný systém, ktorý bude chrániť obete, pretože našim cieľom nie je akoby konať až potom, ako sa odohrá ten problém, alebo teda pasívne reagovať na problém, ale naopak my chceme predchádzať tomu problému a riešiť tie základné príčiny, kvôli ktorému domáce násilie vôbec vzniká a takto chrániť obete, to znamená aj ženy, aj deti, ale aj isté percento mužov môže byť tu zahrnuté, muži môžu byť obeťou domáceho násilia. A poslednou oblasťou je rozvíjanie a vzdelávanie. Spolupracujeme s organizáciami, ako je napríklad Fenestra na Slovensku. Pomáhame ľuďom rozpoznávať symptómy domáceho násilia, pretože je naozaj niekedy veľmi ťažké rozpoznať symptómy domáceho násilia, takže chceme sa ubezpečiť, aby sme poskytovali podporu jednotlivým profesionálom vo viacerých oblastiach a jednotlivcom alebo ľuďom, ktorí pracujú v oblastiach, kde prichádzajú priamo do styku s potenciálnymi obeťami, aby títo odborníci dokázali rozpoznať symptómy, aby mali ten správny prístup k obetiam, aby vedeli, aké presné kroky je možné podniknúť pri poskytovaní podpory obetiam, a to je nesmierne dôležité. To môže byť v školách, v domácnosti, v práci, v zamestnaní. Či už je to váš kolega, je to učiteľ, sused. To znamená, chceme, aby všetci títo aktéri boli pripravení rozpoznať prípadné symptómy domáceho násilia a podať obetiam pomocnú ruku. A môj posledný slajd, ten je v podstate akýmsi oslovením všetkých spoločností a organizácií a výzvou k spolupráci. Domnievam sa, že ak vytvoríme spoločne synergie, môžeme veľmi výrazne pomôcť danej problematike a vytvoriť silné hnutie. Jednotlivci alebo jednotlivé organizácie majú len obmedzené schopnosti a možnosti a zdroje, ale ak sa spojíme, tak naozaj môžeme dosiahnuť výrazné rozdiely a veľmi pragmatickým spôsobom sme začali riešiť tento problém u nás v IKEA. Rozdelili sme to na dve oblasti. Prvá oblasť sa týka nás interne. Je dôležité začať s našimi zamestnancami, s našimi kolegami, s ľuďmi okolo nás a čo veľmi pragmatickým spôsobom môžeme podniknúť. Vzdelávame našich zamestnancov, aby rozpoznali systémy, nielen prostredníctvom oddelenia pre ľudské zdroje, ale každodenné situácie. Keď pijete kávu s kolegom alebo s kolegyňou, je veľmi dôležité a v takýchto situáciách je možné metaforicky povedané zažať svetlo pre niekoho, kto žije v temnotách zo dňa na každý deň. Takže psychologická pomoc kolegom je jedna z týchto oblastí. Ako riešiť takúto situáciu, čo urobiť ako prvé, čo robiť ako druhé, koho môžem kontaktovať, ako a koho môžem poprosiť prostredníctvom akých nástrojov, aj v prípade napríklad nejakej urgentnosti, alebo ak je problém urgentnejší, takže aj takýmto spôsobom školíme našich zamestnancov. Je to podobné ako príklad. Hej, keď máte keď máte v domácnosti požiar, tiež máte istú postupnosť krokov, ako to riešiť, tak podobne sa snažíme pristupovať aj k domácemu násiliu. Aký je prvý, druhý, tretí krok, ktorý treba podniknúť pri riešení toho problému. Chcela by som teraz z hĺbky môjho srdca veľmi pekne poďakovať všetkým mojim kolegom aj partnerom, ktorí poskytujú právnu aj psychologickú pomoc. A máme aj partnera, ktorí nás podporujú, ale v prípade, že napríklad je niekto z našich kolegov obeťou domáceho násilia, máme telefonickú linku, takú ako keby tiesňovú linku, ktorú môžu kontaktovať a aby nemuseli proste sedieť doma v strachu v prípade, že sú obeťami domáceho násilia. Samozrejme poskytujeme individuálnu pomoc obeťam domáceho násilia a snažíme sa šíriť povedomie medzi našimi kolegami. Sme tak aktívni nielen interne, ale rovnako aj externe, teda navonok. A to je vlastne tá druhá časť toho slajdu v pravej časti. A to sú naše aktivity mimo naše organizácie, pretože sa domnievame, že my ako spoločnosť máme dostatočnú silu a zdroje, aby sme konali a máme zodpovednosť voči spoločnosti, aby sme konali. A som veľmi dojatá, že vidím, aké veľké množstvo ľudí mimo našej organizácie si osvojilo tú našu iniciatívu a zapojilo sa a pridalo sa veľmi milým a priateľským vrúcným spôsobom. Samozrejme sa to týka nielen mimovládok, ale aj rôznych združení. Myslím si, že Zuzana z Fenestry bude hovoriť na túto tému viac a je kľúčové poskytovať podporu organizáciám ako je Fenestra, podporovať ich prostredníctvom, zviditeľňovať ich, podporovať ich pomocou zdrojov a toto sú organizácie, ktoré majú expertné znalosti a s pomocou takýchto organizácií budeme silnejší a môžeme mať silnejší zásah. A takisto dáta a výskum sú veľmi dôležité, o tom sme už hovorili, že pomocou dát môžeme zvýrazniť tie dôležité aspekty tých problémov. Takisto angažovanie ostatných aktérov, verejné povedomie o hnutí a vzdelávanie verejnosti je pre nás privilégium, že môžeme my v mene našej spoločnosti hovoriť o tejto iniciatíve a veľmi rada by som vyzvala všetkých aktérov, ktorí ma teraz počúvajú. Možno, že už vy vo vašich organizáciách robíte nejaké takéto aktivity. Prosím, pridajte sa k nám. Spolu budeme mať väčší zásah, väčšiu silu. A samozrejme aktivity v oblasti verejného presadzovania presadzovania alebo teda obhajovania obetí a presadzovania ich práv, niečo, čomu hovoríme v angličtine ako public advocacy, to znamená, že hovoríme nahlas o tomto probléme a spájame sily, aby sme mohli spolu hľadať lepšie riešenia pre obete domáceho násilia. No a s tým sa s vami rozlúčim. Veľmi rada zodpoviem prípadné otázky. Prípadne si rada vypočujem nejakú radu z vašej strany, či podľa vás môžeme niečo v IKEA urobiť lepšie alebo zlepšiť, prípadne niečo doplniť. Budem veľmi, veľmi rada, ak mi dáte spätnú väzbu. A teraz skončím svoj príhovor s poďakovaním za možnosť, že tu dnes môžem s vami byť, že môžem hovoriť o našom zapojení sa, o našom odhodlaní a prísľube urobiť spoločnosť o kusok lepšou a ukázať, čo nie je priateľné. Prestaňme odsúvať riešenie tohto problému na ďalšiu generáciu. Skončíme domáce násilie spolu, tu a teraz. Ďakujem veľmi pekne za vašu pozornosť a rada zodpoviem prípadné otázky.
So I believe this was a very interesting introduction to the topic, and so let me introduce you the dear guests in our studio. Zuzana Brixová, Director of Section of Equality of Men and Women in the Ministry of Social Affairs and Family Affairs, Barbara Burajová, Director of Coordination Center to Prevent Violence Against Women, Peter Rolny, General Director of the Office of the Minister of Interior, and Dušana Karlovská from Fenestra will be online. Good morning. Ivana Vagaska from Business Leaders Forum. Good morning. Ms. Lajčáková from the Office of the President of the Slovakian Republic. We've seen her already, but once again, good morning. And hopefully soon we will also have Silvia Porubenová, Director of the National Center for Human Rights. So let's start with the definition. I believe Ms. Hilali pretty much nailed the opening of the problematic areas, like what are the issues, what needs to be tackled. But Ms. Porubena, if you could summarize why we've been talking for many years about these terrible problems for so many years. So what are the three major steps to do so that the statistics are not so terrible? Just like we saw from the IKEA presentation, 33% of women aged over 15 experiencing domestic abuse, and other high percentage of people who experienced it. Well, three most important steps. First of all, we need to admit that domestic abuse or violence against domestic abuse can be a problem of any one of us. It's not a problem of a specific social sector or social segment. That it's a real problem that is happening pretty much everywhere, and it can happen in any family, in my family, my colleague's family. It can be my sister can be exposed to domestic abuse. It can be my sister-in-law. I mean, if it's not three things, just one thing, we need to admit that this can be a problem of anyone. And we shouldn't pretend that the problem doesn't exist. We shouldn't say like, oh, this is just my colleague, it's just a friend of mine who would never do that. Well, we need to stand up and face the problem and realize that this problem is here, it's not going to go away, it's not going to disappear just like that, and we need to increase the sensitivity of the society to the problem, that there are women
our sisters, our daughters, our mothers are subject to domestic abuse in their everyday lives in various forms. Okay, this is raising of the awareness, I understand, so that this is not stigmatized. But Ms. Burajová, there are also formal steps, right, that needs to be made. For example, one of the problems, if a woman decides to leave the household, she has nowhere to go, she doesn't know how, she's afraid, there's no background for her. Sometimes these are mothers on maternity leave with very low income. So let's look at the formal problems, because yes, the stigma is a very essential problem, but the formal problems are also important. Yes, what Ms. Brixová is openly talking about domestic violence or domestic abuse, that the problem is here. This is the essential pillar of prevention, to de-tabooize the topics, to eliminate the taboo. And it is certainly important for the future to reduce the prevalence of domestic abuse. Even though in reducing the prevalence, we shouldn't expect that we will see a huge decline in domestic abuse quickly and soon, because we see countries with high degree of gender equality, which very much corresponds to violence against women. There's a larger percentage of admitted domestic abuse, because the topic is not a taboo anymore, right? So practical steps, what needs to be done is to provide advice and assistance to women. It is necessary that when there is a reported domestic abuse case, the police needs to be empathic. The victim needs to be assured that the victim is not responsible for the domestic violence, and that the law enforcement do prosecute or do investigate responsibly and impartially. And we need to look at what was the prosecution, was the penalizing of the perpetrators of domestic abuse, and we need to realize this is just the tip of the iceberg, that number of cases of domestic abuse are simply not reported. And we need to realize that when more than 60% of cases of domestic abuse, the perpetrators are not, they don't go to prison. They only have the conditional prison sentence. So this is a sign that this is not really taken seriously. Mr. Only, this is exactly your topic. Well, in case of domestic abuse and sexual violence, 75% of the perpetrators only get conditional prison sentence. So basically, you don't go to prison. You just get you don't go to prison. You only have a conditional prison sentence. So isn't this a problem that violence against women isn't this a terrible signal? Yes, this is a terrible signal. The fact that the domestic violence, domestic abuse is classified as a minor tort, not as a criminal offense. It's a signal that for a woman who is in this terrible situation is a signal of powerlessness. I mean, I do report to the police, but nothing's going to happen. This is a vicious circle. But this is certainly a question of sensitization, and sensitization, just like we heard from Ms. Brixová and Ms. Burajová, it's something that needs to be emphasized. Sensitization on the part of the society, on the part of families, corporate sector, employees, but also sensitization in state sector as well. Sensitization of judges to the phenomena of domestic abuse and violence against women. I need to admit that I'm quite critical to some policemen, because I went to the police to report a serious criminal offense which was related to her personal safety and security, and by a man whom she didn't know. And the reaction at the police was terrible. If I was a victim of rape, I would just turn around and never see the police again. But then we met a police officer who was trained, and the police officer, who was a woman, had it on the table and investigated properly. But the first contact was tragic. I do understand understand that you are retraining police officers, but shouldn't this be essential thing that the first officer of the first contact was sensitized, not the third or second or third police officer who receives the case on the table? Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Sensitization of police officers is the essential first step. I mean, the anecdotal evidence is key for every single person who experienced the problem. Nevertheless, the section for crime prevention at the Ministry of Interior retrains police officers every year, dozens and dozens every year, and it's focusing not only on the police officers, but we also spread our resources towards the municipalities, district authorities, self-governments. So we do perceive the broadness and the depth of the problem. And I do agree with you completely. It's absolutely key that the victim of domestic abuse has the first contact with the police force, which must be empathetic, which must be sensitive, and the police officer needs to assure the victim that something can change. Well, yeah, this is certainly a very noble objective to train the police, but we need to realize that there's a huge fluctuation, a huge job turnover in the police force, so it's a never-ending story, it's a never-ending fight, ongoing problem, because the police officers are coming and going. So let's look at the good practice examples from abroad, where the domestic abuse and sexual abuse and rape is individualized. There is a specific force, police force, dealing with these cases. When even the first contact police officer is a specialist. There's a specialist investigator, man or woman, who is trained and sensitized. We had cooperation with Croatian police force, and in Croatia the police force have this system. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago they did it, and it's very appreciated also by the police themselves, because the specialists are the people who want to work with this topic, and it's a great benefit even for the victims, and benefit also for the policemen or policewomen. And of course they have much better orientation. This is a great idea. Thank you for this impulse. Nevertheless, 99% of cases where the policeman comes in contact with a victim or a potential victim, he or she is a law enforcement, street policeman or policewoman, a law enforcer on the street level. But these are two lines. Yeah, one is specialized assistance for a victim who is identified already. On the other hand, sometimes these are people on the street, I mean policemen on the street, but I totally agree, it's a never-ending cycle of education, raising of awareness, sensitization of the police officers who are in contact with the victims and potential victims, and this will never stop. We have to continue on and on and on every year. Job turnover is a problem, yes, you are right, and we also realize there is a problem that the police officers who have long-standing experience in this area, they gradually are leaving police force. It's a problem of generations. Yes, we started a topic that women who decides to report that she has been exposed to domestic abuse or violence, that she often encounters a non-professional or a low professional approach of the police force. But this doesn't end the domestic abuse. The training is not only needed among the police officers, who in great number of cases they are trying hard, but I mean, there's a vicious circle of this post-separation violence has only started. Social workers, divorce, judges, they don't understand the dynamics of the domestic abuse and violence. They ask the woman to agree with the perpetrator, but it's not possible to agree with the perpetrator of domestic violence. You know, lawyers, social care workers, employers. Yes, employers, exactly. They don't understand why the woman doesn't go to work. Maybe her job performance is reduced. Maybe she is threatened by making her redundant, and they don't understand what the woman is going through. So one of the things
things that could help her to start a new life is the employer, because she can be independent. Ms. Kanovská-Fenester is working with women who are subject to domestic abuse. So we started to talk about the possibility of retraining of every single stakeholder who is in contact with women who reports domestic abuse case, but there's a great deal of women that need assistance even before they made a decision of reporting. So what should happen before the victim goes to the police or decides to divorce and leave the household? Well, certainly the essential thing is to make women aware of where to get help and what can be done, because very often women who are victims of domestic abuse, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to identify that the things that they are experiencing from the partner is basically a violence, or that it leads to violence, and police or other stakeholders appear sometimes later in the chain of steps that needs to be done, but women certainly need to have access to easily accessible help, for example, hotlines, or other locations, physical locations. Also, they need family and close acquaintance or friends around them, because these are the people that women for the first time tell that something wrong is happening in the household. So it's difficult to say what to do before, what to do afterwards. Based on our experience, women who are victims of domestic abuse, it's a long-term continual process with various stages and goes across various aspects of their lives. Ms. Lajčáková, from the office of the President, you get a lot of letters and you have a lot of information. You've been dealing with the topic. The President has mentioned this as a very important topic she cares about. Do you feel in the President's office how the situation of these women has changed since the pandemic started? Well, the President receives a lot of letters and stimuli just because she started to make the public aware of this topic, especially during the times of the pandemic. And women do react to President's speeches on TV or in the media, and they turn to us with their pleas, especially when the police fails to help them. So yes, we do perceive we have a lot of. We have more contacts in relation to domestic abuse, because this is quite an acute topic right now. The pandemics, which basically made us prisoners at home. And victims of domestic abuse and their children are forced to stay at home. The perpetrators, what can be an acute help to these families? They are closed in their homes with the violence perpetrator. Well, the help is the possibility to leave. The woman needs to have the possibility to leave. There must be safe female shelters, but these shelters are limited. In those 20-25 years, we simply couldn't stabilize the regionally accessible shelters or facilities for such women. A woman that is forced to stay at home with a perpetrator must be able to leave. If there is now she needs to have a negative test for coronavirus, which costs €70 for her children and for the woman. And imagine a woman that runs away from her household with 3 children and is a victim of violence. She doesn't have enough money for napkins, for the food, and this is a huge amount of money that they just can't afford to pay. This needs to be tackled. This was a very serious problem during the pandemic. Somehow it's been resolved, but there's still not enough places in those safe female shelters or shelters for women, and there's no sustainable funding for these shelters. Why is not tackled? Well, why is not resolved? Well, there wasn't political will, perhaps, and simply this requires essential changes, and I do hope
that for those years, in those years that this coalition has ahead of it, I'm sure I hope it's going to be resolved. If I may interrupt, talking to the audience of this program, this is certainly space where the private sector can help. I mean, this is not a plea to replace the role of the government, but if the corporate sector and companies are interested in helping the victims of domestic abuse, this certainly is an area where they could more active. Well, I was intrigued by what Ms. Brixová said, and I'll follow up on you, Mr. Olny, where the business sector can be helpful. Many times we hear that women need to have the possibility to leave somewhere from the violent household. This is certainly very important. On the other hand, every time I hear this, I always ask to what degree this is fair, so that the woman needs to run away from violence with her children, and the violence and the perpetrator stays at home. We have a legal institute of expulsion of the perpetrator from the household. Ms. Lajčáková mentioned that today the legislation should be passed, which should provide further assistance to victims of domestic abuse, with prolonging the expiration deadline of this expulsion order by the court. And this actually focuses on our attention on the problem of how we as a society deal with the perpetrators. We keep talking about women exposed or subject to violence, but we are forgetting about those who perpetrate the violence and what should be the signal for the perpetrators of violence. We need to say, like, this is no way how you can treat your loved ones, because there's some legal consequence, whether it's employers talking about domestic abuse in the workplace. You give signals to those who perpetrate the violence that this is unacceptable behavior. So we should also look at this. The commitments to gender equality, these are all the signals these are all signals sent to the perpetrators of the victims. Ms. Lagerska, you here on behalf of the Business Leaders Forum. If someone is watching us and they want to open this topic in their organization, how can an employer help? Thank you very much for inviting me. Just for the start, I'd like to explain that these topics like domestic abuse or mental health, they've been a taboo for many years. They stayed outside the workplace because this is a private problem that doesn't belong to work. And this is changing. This is changing also thanks to the pandemic. It was a breakthrough in a certain sense, and every responsible employer should address these taboo topics. So at Business Leaders Forum, which is comprising 48 large companies with hundreds or thousands of employees, we've opened the topic of domestic violence last year, and we asked the companies whether this is a relevant topic they were addressing, and what would help them to address it even more efficiently. And the answers from a large number of companies was yes, we are addressing the topics, and the mechanisms they've established included, for example, psychological hotline for employees, where the employees can turn to with their private problems. They have the so-called ombudsman in the company, where an employee whom the employee may turn to, also with the cases of domestic violence, of course other issues as well, but it includes domestic violence too. And another institute which is another institute that is key for resolving this problem, because this ombudsman or ombudswoman may turn the employee, the victim of domestic abuse, to the specific authorities. And also philanthropy. We've heard this already, that there are some contacts to companies who support the addressing of the domestic abuse as such, and cooperation with NGOs. US Steel Košice cooperate with organizations like Fenestra, etc., etc. But what we've also heard from our members are two things. First,
talking about the topic and sharing of best practices, so awareness of best practices. And the second topic was a specific manual with particular steps that a company can do in grasping this problem, which is a very sensitive issue. And this is already happening. We had a discussion with Olga Pietruchova last year from the Institute for Research of Labor and Family, and there's a manual or guideline for companies in relation to domestic abuse, which provides a practical aid for companies how to address the issue of domestic violence in their employees or domestic violence, domestic abuse in general. And I see a very much added value in cooperation of public sector and private sector. You know, public sector has know-how, has expertise, and you know, many private companies had to search for the data on their own. They were preparing their own guidelines and manuals. But these guidelines we have already brochure with all the data and information for domestic abuse victims, and any company can just copy it, distribute it, and publish it all over the place, whether it's bathrooms or workplace in general. So what I'm trying to say, it's very important to prepare specific materials and specific steps addressed to the employers so that they are easy to perform, and the employers need to have access to these materials so that they have to be searching for that. So this is one of the things we are looking at. We cooperate with the diversity chart, with the Memorandum of Diversity with the Pountis Foundation, and we have a material from Veronika Valkovičová from the Institute of Research of Labor and Family, how to deal with sexual harassment, and this is another document that we provided to companies. So this is the practical area of cooperation between the private and public sector. Ms. Karlovská, I often participate in these discussions. A number of multinationals are dealing with the topic. And correct me if I'm wrong. These are companies with high wages, people have a certain degree, or let's say the companies are dealing with benefits and well-being of employees, but I'm thinking about what's the situation of a worker in Vranov nad Topľou, a small town in a plant in East Slovakia. Should we be talking about this problem in companies with minimum wages where women are truly difficult, where it's really truly difficult for these women to leave, for example, from the household? Well, certainly, yes, you're right, absolutely. There's one more aspect I need to mention in relation to this. We've heard about a number of measures and steps to be taken, what has been taken. All of this is fine, but we need to look at a different aspect. We need to be specific and address. Ms. Burajová mentioned this slightly about the need of specialized police teams, for example. And what I'm trying to say, you know, it means that besides talking about this and making some steps, the steps need to be addressed, they need to be direct. So we need to be working with what's in the background of the phenomena that women are exposed to violence and abuse, and that's unequal role of women in the society. And this brings me back to your question. This unequal position is across a whole number of areas, including the labor market. And basically, these measures and these steps somehow need to be specifically set. And yes, women who work in minimum wage jobs, women who are in situation where they need to take care of the children and they have limited resources, they are extremely vulnerable in complicated situations, and they are very often afraid of losing the jobs, losing the income, and these are the barriers that prevent them from preventing domestic violence or combating domestic violence. Well, we've heard about gender equality a lot. This is a new scarecrow that somehow disables rational debate. Even though it's about wording, right? Because gender equality and men and women equality, how does this influence the problem?
Well, in line with the human rights and international treaties, and in line with this being an acceptable term in the Council of Europe, this is how I see it. This is my take on the gender equality versus male-female equality. And just recently, the president of Slovakia had a meeting, the International Women's Day, and we were talking about she was talking about the impact on women, and we can see that this impact is quite disproportionate. One of the topics we opened was unequal pay in over-feminized sectors. We had representatives of nurses, employees in social services homes, where around 80% of employees are women. And these jobs are drastically below the average of the national average wage. And the president addressed the topic also to the to particular ministers, and this is how we try to deal with the topic, because we see this in relation to domestic abuse. Ms. Brixova, you're director of Sector for Equality between Men and Women and Equal Pay. And I know you're preparing an action plan. I haven't read the material, but I've heard that you are mentioning in the plan that violence is also perpetrated on men. We know that violence is that everybody is or can be subject to violence, but majority of domestic abuse are women. Obviously, I mean, isn't this a discussion about gender versus sex? Isn't this just this sort of cultural war of liberals against the conservatives? Does it actually help? Well, when it comes to cultural war, I totally understand domestic abuse and abuse or violence against women is a topic that absolutely shouldn't be a subject of cultural war, because this is a topic that we should agree on, that everyone should agree on. This is a problem that everyone needs to disagree with. Women must not be subject to violence, period. This is something that we must all agree, and I hope we do. You know, playing with gender equality or equality between men and women, I believe we shouldn't be losing any time over that. Simply said, we simply can't tell anyone what language they need to use. I believe this is despotic to instruct people how to use these words. I mean, I regard these two terms equal, whether it's gender or sex. But if equality of men and women as a term is more comprehensible for all society, not only people from Bratislava, then I prefer this term. But when it comes to gender equality as a term, I can't say that I'm avoiding using this term because... But you haven't used it yet. Well, I hadn't had the opportunity to use the word gender equality. And talking about violence on men, I mean, we need to be open on this topic. We can't say that there's no violence committed on men. But yes, we need to emphasize that primary victims of domestic abuse are women. Majority of victims of domestic abuse are women. To make the information complete, we need to also mention that yes, there is a certain percentage of men who are also victims of domestic abuse. But imagine you are a man, you are subject to domestic abuse, and because of the various stereotypes, maybe these men have even bigger problem to ask for assistance than women. But we've agreed in the National Action Plan with our work group. It's a National Action Plan which is focusing on women, is focusing on girls, and we will deal with women and girls. But to make it complete, we will mention that this type of violence in limited degree is also committed on men. Question for all three you in the studio. Why do we need another action plan? I don't know how many action plans we've already had. Talking about marginalized Roma community, maybe we have 25 action plans. No one has ever implemented the plan. But are we only talking about action plans where we'll write the list of things to do? But also from this discussion, it seems to me that we all know what needs to be done. We just need to do it. So tell me, what's your take on this?
Well, the action plan needs to be approved by the government as a formal commitment that the things which are in the action plan will be then realized or implemented or executed, if you like. And the action plan on which we are working with the ministry and Barbara here, it will include a number of steps that will effectively, directly help women. We also work with Ms. Karlovska on this. These action plans really need to be an expression of what we are planning to do. It needs to label the problem, label the areas where we see there are problems. Just like we said in the beginning, in 25 years, we see no major advance. We still have no possibility for women who are subject to domestic abuse to go somewhere. We still are here, but we should be over there already. With respect to the efforts we've seen in past years, we still need a lot of work to be done. We need to label these things, we need to come up with tasks, we need to give it to the respective ministries, and then when ministers of the government will commit to that, then here we go. Yes, but we've already had action plans before with dates and competencies, and we keep talking about the same thing. So, Mr. Olny, why do you think it's going to be different this time? You know, this analogy with the corporate world is quite clear. I mean, you build cycles of strategies, you turn them into action plans and specific tasks, then you follow execution. This is analogy with the corporate world, but not all the tasks are executed, not all the deadlines are met. That's the way it goes. On one hand, it's important to have formal commitment. It's just as important as a program, as a manifesto of the government, unless it's a piece of paper to put on the wall. So for the respective ministries and the respective section of the ministries, specific tasks that need to be fulfilled by specific deadlines. For me, it's a good news. I perceive it as a positive thing. I think the problems of these action plans, you mentioned action plan after action plan and another action plan. Problem is when these tasks are not precise, when these are not executable and accountable. I mean, action plan means a task and a tick, yes or no. Ms. Burajová, what's your take? Well, for me, action plan is in the long term, it's the only formal document that speaks specifically about violence against women. So, if it's approved by the government, I perceive it as one of the signals that we know what problem we're talking about. We are labeling the causes, the root causes, and the consequences. And I agree that if we are addressing a problem, there needs to be some plan or some structured outline that states as a structure, which is a very complex structure, that needs to address this problem. And talking about the action plans, I hope there's going to be a lot of plans, national action plans, to prevent and eliminate violence against women, because I don't think that this is a problem we're going to resolve in 5 years. This problem is as old as mankind itself. We can only moderate the consequences and we can prevent its prevalence. We've seen the statistics that the prevalence is huge. There's so much work to be done. What I regard as important on action plans is the follow-up evaluation and measuring of progress. We will probably not only tick with green color that everything's been fulfilled 100%, because it's important if something is fulfilled at least to 50%, because the threshold is so high that even meeting a task for 50% is a great progress. It's a change of an essential paradigm. And looking at achievements, I'd like to mention that we have national hotline for women subject to domestic abuse. Maybe 6-7 years ago, we were only talking about it as having a large dream, and now we have it, and it's operational. Also, accessibility of services has been increased dramatically in the past 5 or 6 years. The fact that we didn't find the way how to make sure that the employees in these services are comfortable enough that in November and December, they know that they will certainly have wages next year. There's a great debt we have against these services, and because these ladies in the field are responsible for the lives of women and children. So this is a problem, yes. So there certainly is so much space to improve and so many big tasks to assign and to perform. But I wouldn't say that we haven't moved anywhere in the past 10 years or 15 years. That would be unfair. And it's good that we are talking about this. Jarka Lajčáková, why do you think this is? That one half of the country are women, right? Around 50%. And in these topics, it seems to be that we are the weak part. We are running in circles. I agree with Ms. Burajová. I don't want to say that nothing has happened, but we probably all agree that not enough has been done and more should have been done. So why do you think it is, Jarka? I believe it's a combination of factors. Well, overall, maybe it's the priority of human rights topics across the governmental agencies, and the role of women and representation of women in top politics and top companies. There's a lot of space for improvement in here. And also it's related to historical and cultural traditions of this country. So it's a combination of these factors that I mentioned. I understand it's probably not a question to be answered easily. Ms. Karlovská, I checked I think it was your statement that 15% of women exposed to violence from a partner turn to the police. So in other words, most people believe that women are making these things up. And in fact, most women do not even report those cases of domestic violence. How to deal with that? Well, this is a very complicated thing. I believe that a major part of this failure to report is related to distrust of women to institutions, not only the police, because this includes a wider group of institutions, not only police. And, this is based on the experience of women. They start to talk about the problem, they call, the police officers, the street officers. They go to the social section in their municipality, they talk about they go to the pediatric physician, or GP, and nothing happens. We haven't moved that the people who are in touch with victims of domestic abuse can identify the problem. They still can't. This is a huge problem. Yes, a number of steps have been taken, but the ability to identify a victim of domestic abuse, that a red flag events, and you start to actively ask if this is happening or not happening, this is not working, or is working only to a limited degree. That's a problem. If women start to talk about this experience, they still encounter simplification or people just don't believe it's so serious a problem, making it a light problem, diminutive, and the consequences against the perpetrator of domestic abuse is very inadequate, it's poor. And then, we have experience that we deal with women every day. And for those years of being exposed to violence at home, they have hundreds of contacts with institutions. They talk about the experience, but a large number of the measures taken by the authorities are very poor. They can't provide protection. They can't stop the violence, because that's the essential first thing. I mean, if you contact an authority, the first thing that should happen
happen is that the violence is interrupted. And this is exactly what Ms. Burajová said. Shouldn't we turn the topic around? Shouldn't we talk about perpetrators, not not to deal with women who are running away from their homes, but shouldn't we look at the perpetrators of the violence? Well, certainly yes. I'm not saying turning it around, but we need to look both at protection and protective measures for women and children, and then equally the second pillar should be looking at the perpetrators and strictly consequences, strict consequences on the perpetrator. A woman calls the police, and the police arrives to the household, and the police fails to be consequential. The perpetrator realizes, okay, they didn't do anything, I can continue in what I'm doing. No consequences for the perpetrator equals he believes he can continue. And very often, after a number of steps and decisions and legal procedures, separation from the violent partner, these men continue in their in their violent behavior through children, through work, and it's a continuum of violence. There's no consequences for the perpetrator. So this needs to be direct at every stage of the cycle. We need to be reacted at every single stage of this castle. Mr. Rowley, you want to react? Well, there's this aspect that has been mentioned, but I believe it's critical and it's hard to resolve it in a short term. It's working with the future potential perpetrators. Education, and dealing with what does it mean, what it means to be male, toxic masculinity issues, working with the future men, boys today, and maybe I'm vulgar, but shifting the taboo that we don't talk about violence, like what happens behind the door is my business. No, we should shift the perception that violence is taboo, and gradual work with how to redefine what it means to be men, or what it means to be male, and what things are acceptable and what things are not acceptable. And this is purely a question of schools and education. Yeah, we'll probably all agree with this. There's a large number of questions from Slido, practical questions too. So I'll ask a question and you raise your hand if you want to answer. First question, how can I join as a lay person? I'd like to be a volunteer or help with my time and skills. Can I get education in this area? At a regional level, it's good to search for a specific organization that is helping. Also on our website, zastavmenasilie.sk, stopviolence.sk, there is a division by the respective regions. Find your regional organization, get in touch with them. There's certainly a large number of volunteering activities that you can join and support with your experience or skills. There's education, primary prevention for young people. There's a large number of activities. Please get in touch with them. Ms. Vagaska, this is probably going to be a question for you. I'm a representative of a company. Which steps can I implement to prevent domestic violence or to help my colleagues who may be victims of domestic violence? Well, I can only repeat that this is an initiative that we started last year under the auspices of the Institute of Labor and Family. You can go to the website. We've downloaded it from them and we provided it to our companies, member companies. These are exactly materials that are easily accessible to any employer. I'll just add, because we are the author of the materials that you are talking about,
At the moment, we've provided the material to Business Leaders Forum because we'd like to sit down with the employers and look at what could be more specified, more specific in terms of the procedures, looking at the respective conditions or possibilities of employers. So the first objective was to provide an initial framework, what can be done by employers and how. And this is all on your website? Yes, it's all on our website, and it's among the activities as an output of our activities. Okay, good. So, next question. Which country is a model country for us in this topic? Is it Norway, for example? Do they manage this problem the best? Well, in Norway, does someone want to? Someone wants to talk, but I'm not sure if... Perhaps it's the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Iceland. They are perhaps an inspiration for us. But when it comes to the countries, we need to pay attention. Looking at the good practice examples, not always is suitable for our context. So not every single experience can be transferred easily. So they need to be reapplied to our context. Well, I guess it all applies to legislation as well, because the legislation is quite good. The problem is that legislation is applied by people. Mr. Olnik, message for you. Thank you very much for retraining the police, and we believe that your role is essential. Oh, well, thank you very much for the feedback. I'd like to focus your attention on our website, prevenciakriminality.sk, or translated crimeprevention.sk. You can join our activities, and you can even look on the interactive map, specific region, specific city or town, a specific subject or entity that can give you a helping hand, and also our system of contact centers for victims of crime. So prevenciakriminality.sk, that's the name of the website. And could a woman complain about such a policeman who doesn't help her? Yes, of course. I mean, as soon as you file a complaint on the criminal officer, a police officer, it's a stimulus for the special section, and these complaints are taken very seriously. I mean, but there's a number of perpetrators also who are from the ranks of the police. Do we have statistics on that? No, unfortunately, we do not have statistics for that, but it's a question that we are also dealing with. Just like again, perpetrators can be found in every walk of life, in every social group, also among policemen, unfortunately. So the problem we can be dealing with is that a police officer that deals with domestic case abuse, he's a police, he's a friend of mine, or he's my cousin's friend, so yes, this is certainly a problem. We need to tackle also in relation to how we distribute the respective crews of the police officers, and shifts from district to district can be quite a good idea. So usually we want to make sure that the district where the policeman lives is different from the district where he or she works. What are the real possibilities for the president to help, except for attracting attention to the topic? The microphone is off. Okay. Thank you for the question. Apologies, because I had a technical issue, so I had to ask for assistance. Nevertheless, the president doesn't have executive powers, of course, in this sphere, but what we can do and what we do is to support cooperation. We inform about the problem, and Our cooperation also led to this legislative change. We inform the respective ministries. We have a lot of stimuli. We cooperate with Vice President of the Police Force, Ms. Mashkarova, to whom we send these information and notifications. And also when providing the president very much takes into account all the competences. She very much takes into account the victims of domestic abuse when performing or exercising all her competences. There are several practical questions. First, how can you recognize that a colleague of mine is a victim of domestic abuse or that she's subject to violence? How can I help? I've seen many people saying that sometimes when you encounter domestic violence, you not always have to report, but maybe you need to contact the woman first. So what's the best way, really, practically, when I have a suspicion that my friend, my colleague, or a classmate is subject to domestic abuse? What can I do? What should I do? Well, the fact that there's something serious going on in someone's life can be recognized easily or relatively easily. I mean, the behavior of that person begins to change. Violence against women is about power and control. So a number of women start to limit their social contacts with friends. They start to be more, inward turning. They are rushing to be at home at a certain time. Another symptom, non-physical symptom, is change of behavior. Like every problem, you need to ask the person, do you need help? Can I help you somehow? Maybe you should form the question not in a confrontational way. You shouldn't ask the person, are you subject to violence or are you exposed to violence? But I noticed that your behavior has changed recently. You're more, inward turning. You want to talk to me? Or what I believe is also very important, to inform everyone who offers help. You shouldn't be disappointed when help is refused. Rejection is a natural reaction. People don't like to talk about the problem. Sometimes they need to think about that problem. Sometimes they're not at the stage of being able to talk about the problem. You shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be angry. You need to emphasize, anytime you want to talk about it, you can come to me, and you may wait for the next steps. Okay, but these are the people that know each other. But what should you do? You have a colleague from a different department, and you only greet her on the corridor, and you see that suddenly she had a blue eye or a broken hand, or you have a neighbor. You live in a large block of flats, 30 or 40 flats, and you hear noise. Violent noise from the household, from the other apartment, and you see the woman with a black eye, for example. So what should you do in that situation? Should you call the police? Well, if it's a direct threat to life and health, you should probably call the police. And if you hear an attack or see an attack, you need to call the police. There's nothing to think about. Yes, exactly, Mr. Rowley. Ms. Brixova? Yes, I wanted to add that when women are exposed to violence, her friends, her family, they may not understand her. They need to be very patient. She doesn't pick up phones. She cancels meetings or meetings or dates with friends, and she does many things that may even make her friends angry or her relatives angry. But you need to be patient. You need to be open. You shouldn't push on that woman because she may not be at the stage of being able to talk about it. You need to trust that person that once, when there's the right time, she can tell it to you. So don't be angry. Even though you may be angry because she doesn't tell you or she doesn't pick up your phone or she cancels the meetings with you, the appointments, you need to be able to trust. I mean, until you don't feel it's on your own that really anyone can become a member, that can become a victim of domestic abuse, then you still keep asking, like, why doesn't she leave? I mean, she can leave, right? But it's much more complicated than that, and we need to understand it. I'd like to interrupt. Yes, there's this situation when we have, we call it like third-party information or third-party notification, when a colleague or close people of the victim contacts us. They don't understand. They understand the behavior of the woman because they understand the dynamics of the violent relationship. But also, very often, this is a very natural reaction that they are afraid. They are concerned about the life of the woman or the life of the children, and based on this fear, they feel the urgent need to do something, urgent need to help. And these are the things that sometimes can be even dangerous, especially when they make steps without talking without talking to the victim. So this sometimes needs to be adjusted. We need to work with it. We need to explain these helpers, so to say, to explain them the situation, and also offer these helpers the ways how to support the women, but not by applying more pressure, because this pressure multiplies the fear and the concern. And sometimes we can be angry about these women that they don't do enough steps to eliminate the violence, but there's further pressure on the woman. But these women are already under pressure. So we need to get more understanding of a wide range of situations where women decide about doing something and being physically safe. The decision to leave is this is an extreme decision, and these women and children are sometimes exposed to threat of their lives. Sometimes even the perpetrator can kill them. Sometimes the choice is between being killed and staying. So it's very, very sensitive thing. The hotline, national hotline for women, there are also operators who can advise these so-called third parties how they can maybe help the victims of domestic abuse. Okay, final question, because the last 2 minutes. Final question, Ms. Brixová, perhaps this is a question for you. Statistically, talking about geographical aspect of the topic, what does statistics say? Which areas are the most, or which areas are typical for domestic abuse? We all remember in the 90s, it said every fifth woman, then we heard one in four women. So how are we faring? Well, statistically, 1 in 3 women experiences some sort of violence in her life. It's terrible. Naturally, this is slightly lower when we talk about the violence in relationships, but still, regional statistics are not available to us. I'm not sure if Barbara or Institute for Labor and Family Research have the statistics. We at Ministry don't have regional statistics, but we need to emphasize that violence on women and violence in partnership doesn't concern specific segments of the society. It goes across the board. It's not happening only somewhere in marginalized societies. It happens also in so-called better families or Christian families. And unless we admit that women are exposed to violence, even in families that look totally okay, families that, for example, advocate for conservative values or for Christendom, or rich families, is not a question of poor social standing. It goes across the whole society. Thank you very much. It's been a very insightful debate, even though a little sad. Hopefully, it will advance us at least one step ahead. Zuzana Brixová, Director of Section of Equality of Men and Women, Ministry of Labour Social Affairs. Peter Roni, General Director of the Minister of Interior's Office. And we've also talked with Dušana Karolská from Fenestra. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne.
Ivana Vagaskov z Business Leaders
Ivana
Forum.
Vagaska from Business Leaders Forum. Thank you,
Jarmila
goodbye.
Lajčáková z kancelárie
Jarmila
prezidentky
Lajčáková
Slovenskej republiky, ďakujem.
from the Office of the President of the Slovak
Samozrejme,
Republic.
ďakujem aj
And
generálnej
I'd like to
riaditeľke
thank
IKEA,
General Director of
ktorá mala veľmi
IKEA,
zaujímavú prezentáciu.
Mulia El Hilali, who had a very
Ďakujem aj
interesting
našim
presentation.
partnerom, Americkej
We'd like to thank to our
obchodnej
partners,
komore,
AmCham
samozrejme aj IKEA
and
a Business Leaders
IKEA
Forum.
and
Uvidíme
Business
sa
Leaders
zase
Forum.
opäť.
We will
Dúfam,
see
že
you
nejaké ďalšie zaujímavé
soon,
témy.
hopefully
Ďakujem, že ste
with
boli s nami.
another
A
interesting
pekný
topic. Thank you for being with us. Have a nice day.
Sto rokov s vami v dobrom aj v zlom. Pravda.